Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 41, Bourne Beat by Beat.
That's right, Jonathan. After 2 rounds of polls this week, we've finally settled on doing Jason Bourne. And it's a series that is kind of near and dear to our hearts. We kind of came to it separately, but as younger human beings, we both really enjoyed the series. I would watch it over and over and over before I even really decided that I wanted to get into film. It became something that I loved. Yeah,
and just to kind of date ourselves a little bit, these movies were coming out while we were in elementary and middle school, so we grew up with them through middle school and high school, and just, as young boys who are interested in spy things and fighting, we loved them. And they're actually probably one of the big reasons that I want to even do filmmaking, because every time one of these movies ends, I'm just like, I have to make something epic. So this is a little bit of a passion, personal week, and it's a good break from a lot of the heady stuff that we've been into.
Yeah. Not that Tarkovsky isn't a great filmmaker. It's just that watching all of his movies in 1 week, which I might or might not have done, spoiler alert, I did do that, can take a lot out of you. And it can be nice to sit back and just watch young Matt Damon, because wow, he's so young, just kick some butt all week long.
Yeah, as Nick Frost would say in Hot Fuzz, you need to learn how to switch off. And that's what we're doing.
Exactly. So these films are based on a series of novels by Robert Ludlum, but they are fairly loosely based on those novels, from what I believe.
Yeah, so sometimes we talk about the merits of a film as an adaptation and the interaction between the actual author and the filmmakers, but we're not really going to go that angle this week. They deviate from the books quite a bit. The books were based heavily in Cold War politics and stuff like that, and the movies are more modernized and kind of go in a different direction. I believe Robert Ludlum was the executive producer on at least the Bourne Identity, so he was part of that process. But other than that, we're just going to talk about these as standalone films that took inspiration from these books rather than their qualities as an adaptation of Robert Ludlum's novels.
Correct. And the 3 films we're going to be talking about today specifically, the Bourne trilogy proper, not those other 2, we're not going to talk about them, are the Bourne Identity from 2002, which is directed by Doug Liman, and the other 2, the Bourne Supremacy from 2004, and the Bourne Ultimatum from 2007, both directed by Paul Greengrass. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the difference in direction today. And of course, the Bourne Ultimatum from 2007 did win a few Oscars. It won for Best Editing, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Sound Editing.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple overview of these movies, but in some ways they're kind of straightforward, but they are very enjoyable. So let's get into it.
So the Bourne Identity from 2002, that's where this all starts, with a mystery. Because really this film is a mystery. And the mystery is a man floating in the ocean with 2 gunshot wounds, or 3 gunshot wounds, it doesn't really matter, in his back. And that man is Jason Bourne, played by Matt Damon. Except at this point, he doesn't even know his name. He is saved by a fishing vessel who kind of patches him up and brings him to shore. And he is left with his only clue, which is a laser pointer type thing found embedded in his hip, pointing him to a Swiss bank account in a bank in Switzerland, where he goes to try to find out his identity. There he finds out that his name is Jason Bourne, or so he believes. He also finds a bunch of other curious things in the safety deposit box, like various passports with various names, a gun, and a bunch of other things that make you seem like a dangerous person, or probably a spy or an assassin or something of that kind. And he is chased through Switzerland until he runs into a woman named Marie, who kind of goes on the run with him as he tries to find out his identity. And he's being chased by members of the CIA, a Black Ops team that goes by the name of Treadstone. It's like a program. I don't want to say team, I want to say program, that is kind of part of this mystery that he's wrapped up in, that explains why he can't remember his past and all this stuff. And over the course of the film, he is chased by them, trying to figure out his own past, trying to figure out, and at the same time, trying to figure out who he is now, which I find to be maybe the most interesting question of the film, is that he kind of wakes up with kind of a clean slate. Like, he's haunted by his past, but at the same time, like, if you don't remember any of your past, you kind of have this license to create a new identity too, which he attempts to do over the course of the film by figuring out what his old identity was.
And all three of these films, really.
Yeah, no, it's not a quest that ever really ends for Jason Bourne, especially because the studio executives won't let it end. But that bit is besides the point. The point is that this is really kind of a huge query into the identity of a man and what makes you you. Are you defined by your past? Are you able to break away and create a new future for yourself? And of course, there's crazy action scenes mixed in throughout. He's hunted by these crazy wet work agents who were in the same training program as him, and he defeats them with crazy weapons like a ballpoint pen. And all sorts of crazy stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Let's kind of start off, and I want to mention at least the casting of Matt Damon himself in this role, because he does a very good job. He plays, he's very stoic. He's a hardened assassin by trade. So you have that element, but also the human side that comes out since he's lost his memory and he's trying to just be a decent human. And so he really plays the character with depth and nuance, not necessarily completely slate like think of Keanu Reeves from The Matrix, or very over the top or something. And actually, just doing a quick Wikipedia, you can see some of the other options that were considered for Jason Bourne, which are like Brad Pitt, Russell Crowe, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Cruise, Sylvester Stallone. And you could just like imagine all the ways that these movies could have gone wrong had anyone else been chosen.
Arnold Schwarzenegger would have been awful in this role. Like, so I love Arnold Schwarzenegger, but this is not a role for him.
Yeah.
No. This is, I mean, the one of the great things about Jason Bourne is that he's scary, but he's lovable at the same time. Like, he's absolutely frightening, and I would not want to be on the other side of a fight from him. But at the same time, like, you see those human moments like you were talking about.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder as the series progresses, like, would those parts of his personality have ever come out again had he not had this experience of losing his memory and trying to create a new identity basically from scratch? But it's just taking a moment to appreciate what Matt Damon does with this character. He's very young, especially having seen him in so many things still nowadays, and then going back to 2002, you're like, oh, he's so young, but he pulls this character off with a lot of maturity. Yeah,
and just to go into a specific scene, because over the course of the film, he's our protagonist. We spend a lot of time with him in his field of vision. We can see him on screen. We can see his emotions on his face as he's struggling with his identity, as he's struggling with these people who are trying to kill him. But there was a really interesting directorial choice towards the end of the film where Conklin, who is a character who runs the Treadstone Agency, and a character who will become important later on, Nikki, are in a safe house in Paris, and they are aware that Jason Bourne is coming to the safe house. They don't know why. They think he's coming to kill them. And we know otherwise. But at the same time, when we start off the scene, we spend all of our time with Conklin and Nikki. We don't see Jason Bourne. We see the house go dark. We see the telephone lines go dead. And we see them kind of stretching out in the house. And Jason Bourne becomes the monster in the dark, like the unseen person who is just ultimately terrifying, even though he's our protagonist. Even though we empathize with him, he can still like flip that switch and, become that lurking monster in the dark. And then, of course, the confrontations start, and like everybody who meets Jason Bourne, they realize there's more to him than just, the scary monster guy.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things throughout these movies is how information is revealed. Because obviously, you're making movies about spies. It's all about what you know and what the other person knows and stuff. So we spend most of the film. We start from Jason Bourne's perspective. We start in the middle of the ocean. We don't know who he is. He doesn't know who he is. So we are on this journey with him. But as things start getting pieced together, we transition a little bit more into the CIA's point of view, and we see that they don't know what's going on either because Jason Bourne is doing these actions and they think that he still knows what he's doing. And so they're trying to figure out why he's doing things that don't make sense. So we know a little bit more than they do in that instance, but there are those times when they switch it, and like that moment you were talking about, we don't know what Jason Bourne is doing either. So the way that they switch perspectives to build suspense in this movie is really well done.
And of course, this is at its core a mystery film. Like there's action and there's adventure and there's drama, and fantastic car chases, which we will have to talk about. But the core of it is a mystery. That's what propels the plot forward. So every time Jason gets an answer to a question, like let's talk about the Swiss bank, for instance. Like he spent like the first 15-20 minutes of the film trying to figure out who he is. He doesn't even know his name after waking up on this in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, being picked up by a fishing boat. He gets to the Swiss bank. He finds a passport in English. He's an American, Jason Bourne. Okay, answer. But there's also all this currency in the box, all these other passports in this box, a gun, all these other questions that get presented at the same time. And then those propel the plot forward. And then those propel the plot forward. And then he finds out what Treadstone is, but he doesn't know like who runs Treadstone. How is he connected to Treadstone? And just all those things that keep us guessing and guessing and guessing until the end of the film, at which point, I don't even know if we have all the answers. I mean, of course we don't have all the answers because there's more movies. So,
yeah, and the other thing is there's kind of the way that the movies are structured is that each one revolves around a specific memory that Jason Bourne starts to get back, and we see flashes of throughout the film, all culminating at the end when we get the whole memory and we realize what happened. It's kind of the structure for each of these movies. So in this one, it's about this job that he pulled where he was supposed to assassinate this African leader, and he flubs it. It doesn't work out, and so he gets left in the ocean after jumping off this boat. So as we're watching, we're kind of putting these things together, and that's the mystery. And then each one kind of sets up its own kind of internal mystery based on a different memory / job that he's trying to recall.
And we can't talk about Jason Bourne without talking about the crazy weapons that he uses. And I think I might have mentioned this a second ago, but it's important that we dive into it because it's more than just, oh, that's really cool on screen. And of course, that is part of it. Like, these are action blockbusters. Don't get us wrong. They are definitely, on some level, popcorn movies that you can just sit back and enjoy and turn your mind off for. Although the mysteries make those hard. But the unconventional weapons, and specifically in the Bourne Identity, we're talking about the pen where he fights the bleach blonde guy in the apartment in Paris with the ballpoint pen. Yeah, who swings in off a rope.
This is super dramatic.
Super dramatic. Great entrance. But it does a lot of things. One, it's a hard weapon to use, which means Jason Bourne is really skillful. So that's something that it communicates to us as an audience. Two, it puts him at a disadvantage. Because you see two guys, you don't know anything about them. Hypothetical scenario, you see two guys, one has a machine gun, one has a ballpoint pen. Who do you think is going to be the underdog in that fight? And so then, put Jason Bourne in that scenario, and whoever he's fighting, Jason Bourne, even though he's so skillful and we kind of know he's going to win, it kind of helps create that feeling of, oh no, he only has a ballpoint pen. How is he going to win this fight? And then, of course, he does, and it makes it all the more impressive when he does. And keeping your hero constantly being the underdog throughout the course of a film and an entire film series is so important, especially And it's even more impressive because they keep him as kind of like the big bad boogeyman for the CIA throughout all three films as well. He's the underdog and the boogeyman, which is crazy that they pulled that off, but it's really effective because we really enjoy that as an audience. At least I do. When a protagonist can embody all of that at once, it makes them really fun to root for.
Yeah, and the other thing that makes the pen so interesting in this one, first of all, it's the first time we see this kind of resourcefulness in fighting. He did a couple other just like fist brawls before, but like using the pen sets up his part of his character, which is how resourceful and how he uses his surroundings to gain the advantage. And the pen isn't the thing that makes him win this fight, but it keeps our interest, and it also keeps our interest because we're trying to. The other element that goes into all these fight scenes, and this one specifically, is the camera work, because it is very kinetic. It's very in motion all the time, almost like you're kind of in the middle of the fight, ducking your head around, only catching glimpses of things at a time. But Doug Liman allows us to usually see most of the impacts, but only for like a couple seconds. And then so we're trying to keep up with the fight, and our reflexes are as much on edge as Bourne's are. So we're seeing like flashes of, oh, he grabbed a pen. What's he going to do with that? Oh my gosh, did he just stab him in the neck with a pen? Is that in his hand? It's kind of, it's all of these things going in together. But this kind of camera movement and camera coverage was a new thing at this point. I think The Bourne Identity was one of the first action movies to do this very kind of handheld, in the moment kind of a coverage, and became very popular afterwards, almost too popular in some cases. But it really works in this situation because everything is so fast paced, and Bourne is trying to keep up with everything, and just like the audience is. And the other interesting thing about this scene is that it's built up really well with like 5 minutes of just very nonchalant and very quiet exploring of this apartment that belongs to Bourne, but he doesn't know anything about it. So we're just kind of meandering through with Bourne and Marie, like checking the faucets and checking the phone and all this stuff before this huge fight breaks out. And that's always a good thing to do, is to contrast a really high adrenaline scene by putting a very slow and quiet scene right before it. It really helps sell the impact.
Right. So that when you have a guy swinging in on a rope through a window with a machine gun, it really shakes you up.
Right.
And I feel like we do have to talk about Marie in this film, because
only film we can.
It's the only film we can talk about Marie in, which is a shame because Marie's so great. Yeah. She's really great. And I think the reason why I like Marie so much in this film is that her relationship with Jason Bourne, which does eventually become like a relationship over the course of the film, is initially pretty much optional until they get too deep into the crap fest that they get themselves into over the course of the film. But it's never like Jason Bourne is like forcing Marie to come along with him. He gives her so many chances to be like, you can leave now if you don't want to be in this. But she just keeps being like, no, I think I'll stay. I think I'm safer with you at a certain point, which is great because she's kind of down on her luck, and they find each other at the right time to help each other out, even though it's this wild ride to help each other out. Literally a wild ride in the case of the car chase in the scene. Yeah. Which is just a great way to do a romance over the course of the film, especially one that's wrapped up in a mystery, wrapped up in an action thriller, wrapped up in the enigma that is Jason Bourne at the same time.
Yeah, and it goes back to kind of one of Pixar's main tenets, which is coincidences to get your characters into trouble are great, but coincidences to get them out are not. And in this case, it's not even coincidences. It's just a legitimate decision to, okay, I'm going to stick with him. And at the beginning, it's like, okay, it could be harmless enough. He's a nice guy. There's a couple quirks about him. But really, I mean, if you think about it, if we're starting with someone who doesn't know who they are, they could be literally anybody. So like this could just be some business guy who was walking down the street one day and got hit on the head. Of course, he woke up in the ocean. So, but it's not. There's nothing that says that this guy has killed lots of people and lots of people are going to come after him to kill him. So the more that we get into it, the more reason that Marie gets to get out of this. But her attachment to Bourne has grown through their experiences together. One of the best lines in the movie is, "How could I forget you? You're the only person that I know." So like Bourne clearly has an attachment to her, and then she just kind of gets sucked in. And the more dangerous it gets, the stronger that their bond becomes too, as we go through this.
Yeah, and I'm willing to say that Marie is one of the keys to Jason Bourne being a good guy over the course of this movie and the whole series. Because I mean, Jason Bourne is, his past is haunting him, but all that he really has in his mind from the past is a couple memories that will haunt him, kind of like PTSD, like over the course of the series. And his training, all of the physical abilities, like you or I would be, we might have amnesia, but we can still read and write, that type of thing, except his read and write, in addition to being able to read and write, is able to kick ass. Right. But he's crafting his personality over the course of this film, and having somebody along the ride with him who needs him and can help reflect the best parts of him back at him is kind of key to him being a good guy at the end of this film, rather than being just a bitter guy who can kill people with amnesia.
Yeah, and we also see that he's not a mindless killing machine. He does get to the point of having the people who have harassed and abused him literally at gunpoint, and then he makes decisions often to not kill them unless he's like literally in a life or death situation. Sometimes it's because of information, and sometimes just because he doesn't need to kill them. And so we can definitely see that there is a part of him that's not just completely brainwashed by Treadstone to kill because that's the right option. He has this other moral part of his brain that says there's no need to kill this person as if your life isn't directly in danger, which is an interesting element, talking about someone who is such a trained weapon, essentially.
Yeah, and the fact that the CIA always expects him to be worse than he actually
merciless,
is.
Yeah,
they always expect him to be merciless. They always expect him to be this cold-blooded killer, but he falls short of that expectation every single time. Even when he does violent things, then he looks like a good guy in our eyes.
Yeah, there's a great moment that kind of sums that all up at the end of Ultimatum, which we'll get to when we get there, but that is a consistent character trait throughout these movies.
Mm-hmm. He refuses to be the monster they think he is, which is key to these films working. Speaking of films, plural with an S, let's talk about the next one, The Bourne Supremacy, also with an S. Jonathan, do you want to talk about that one?
Yes, The Bourne Supremacy, or as I like to call it, Much Ado About Espionage, because this film starts off with a big misunderstanding, albeit a planned misunderstanding. So essentially we start off with this assassin who is not Jason Bourne. He's Bones from Star Trek and Éomer from Lord of the Rings. The one and only Karl Urban. He comes in,
I didn't even know.
Yeah, that's Karl Urban. You really can't recognize him from Lord of the Rings with all the hair and beard and horse stuff. But anyway, he comes in and kills two Russian officials or something like this, and basically frames Bourne for this murder. So then the CIA gets wrapped up, and they are looking for Bourne because they found this fingerprint, which I don't know why they would think that Bourne would even leave a fingerprint, but they come chasing after Bourne, and also the Russian agent comes chasing after Bourne, and he's just trying to live his life in India with Marie peacefully out of anybody's way. So he just kind of gets all wrapped back up into this inadvertently, much in the way Much Ado About Nothing is just one guy trying to stir up trouble, and everything kind of goes to hell. So
and Marie dies.
Yes, Marie dies in in the flow of things where the Russian agent is trying to get to Bourne. And so now Bourne has a motivation to actively go and look for all the people in Treadstone who started this. He doesn't know. At the end of Bourne Identity, we should mention, Treadstone got shut down and a new organization called Blackbriar got started up, which is essentially the same thing, different name. So Bourne's going after all these Treadstone people, and Treadstone is kind of dead, so he has to figure that out. And then we're going after this other CIA agent now named Pamela Landy, who becomes very important, and she brings an interesting dynamic to the CIA because she starts to realize these things we've been talking about, that maybe Bourne isn't what all of the original Treadstone people have been saying he is, that he's just like this evil monster. But she realizes that maybe he doesn't remember things and maybe he's trying to be a different person. So she is, throughout the film, kind of becomes Bourne's advocate within the CIA inadvertently, like they're without any kind of collaboration between them. So that brings a new element to this movie that we didn't see in the last one. And the memory, like I said, each one of these is kind of structured around one memory that Bourne is trying to recreate in his mind, is the Berlin job, which was Bourne's first job, which was never on record. It was something he did only for the higher-ups and was never recorded. And so he's trying to figure this out, and there's no record of it. And also there's another thing happening in Berlin that keeps bringing it to his mind. So it gets a little confusing. But that's what happens when you can't remember who you are.
Yeah. And it's kind of hard to follow as an audience. Not
until
impossible.
You've seen it 20 times like us.
Yeah. And part of the reason that I might think that's hard to follow is that I first watched this when I was like, I don't know, 10 years old or something like that. So, right. Nothing was going to make so much sense to me, especially not international espionage. But I do want to talk about how important the Berlin job is to making this film work and making this film be interesting. Even though it might feel a bit random, but the fact that it's a mystery to both Bourne, who was there but can't remember it, and to Pam and a large section of the CIA.
And Pam is unrelated to Treadstone. She's in a different part of CIA who was working with the Russians who were killed, and then just by virtue of Jason Bourne being brought in, she has to learn everything about Treadstone. So she's new to Treadstone and trying to figure it out also. Yeah,
Pam is the part of the CIA that we are happy exists.
Right.
Treadstone and Blackbriar and everyone associated with that is the part of the CIA that we are terrified of.
Right.
Essentially. But
that we hope doesn't exist.
Right. Although apparently this was based on this entire series, the Jason Bourne series, the books were based off of a program that existed like Treadstone. I don't know much about it. That's just what I've heard. So
probably no one does.
But please don't kill me. Okay. I'm just throwing it out there. Anyway, the fact that the Berlin job is a mystery to both Jason Bourne and Pamela Landy is super important because they're both trying to figure it out. They're both trying to figure it out at the same time from two different angles, from two different sides, from two different teams, even though towards the end they're kind of on the same team. And having multiple mysteries, the same mystery exists on multiple fronts is part of what makes this so interesting. Because like I talked about with the Bourne Identity, reintroducing, it answers a question, but then it introduces 4 more questions. In the Bourne Supremacy, we start off with one event that is 2 questions because it's a question to 2 different people. It's a question to Pam and it's a question to Jason Bourne. And then they, so we have 2 starting points. So we start off with a higher multiplication factor of questions, I guess, that multiply over the course of the film, keeping it interesting and keeping the audience and the characters guessing over the course of the film.
So although all of this kind of does sufficiently set up motivations and stuff for Bourne and stuff, it's kind of the weakest setup of the 3, which I think is why Bourne Supremacy is typically rated as the rated lowest out of the 3 by a little bit. They're all pretty much the same rating on IMDb and most other sites. But the fact that really just one person stirring up trouble is kind of what set this whole thing off. Doesn't give too much like you know, emotional involvement for the audience. It's just like, oh man, why did this happen? Like, we don't get any kind of look into the bad guy's life or anything. Just the fact that they want to set up Bourne for some reason. We don't know why, but he gets Bourne involved, and then he goes after the CIA. It's not as compelling as the other two, where we're really wrapped up in Bourne's story and stuff like that. So that's another interesting aspect of this one as the middle movie in a trilogy, that there's always kind of that weird thing of trying to kind of pick up from the last movie and leave room for the next movie while still being a self-contained movie with a beginning, middle, and end. That's just always going to be a tough spot for second movies in a trilogy.
Yeah, and that definitely, like you said, does seem to be the trend. Like the second movie is maybe the weaker, the lower part of all three films. But other than just its position in the trilogy, you also had a change at the top. You had a new director coming on board. You had Paul Greengrass switching out for Doug Liman, or Lyman, who knows? He does, but whatever. But I always like to think of the Bourne Supremacy, at least when we were watching it this week, which is different from how we watched it as kids, which is just enjoying it and looking at how, oh, Bourne is so badass. Now we're looking at it with a more critical eye. We're trying to understand what makes this film great, like I say every week in the intro. And looking at it that way, this film feels like Paul Greengrass getting his feet set in the world of Jason Bourne. And then the next film, the Bourne Ultimatum, feels like he's comfortable in it now, and he's going to really do his thing. But, you know, trying to match a pre-established style coming in as a director has to be harder than just setting up your own style.
Yeah, and as far as the new director, like talking about the camera work from the last one, it's interesting to see that I've never noticed it before, but paying attention this time, knowing that there's a director switch and all that, I actually could notice a distinct kind of visual flavor shift a little bit. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but Greengrass does a great job of picking up where Lyman left off and keeping a very similar aesthetic and all of that, but he kind of amplifies it even more. And there's the same cinematographer throughout all these films, so any change is kind of being brought on by the director. And in this one, we're seeing more a use of the telephoto lens, especially in conversations, and another interesting thing that happens in conversations is over the shoulder shots, which would typically be, you know, keeping part of one character's the back of their head and shoulder in the frame in order to keep a spatial relationship when cutting back and forth across a table that two people are talking at. But he uses a telephoto lens, which just think about it like looking through a telescope. Everything gets bigger, but also there's a very fine point of focus, and everything outside of that plane of focus is out of focus, obviously. But also framing so that you are just seeing a character's eyes or part of their face through this tiny hole that's made by the silhouette of the back of a person's neck and shoulder is a really interesting thing that happens a lot. And it's a visual way to kind of put us in a spy movie, because it's almost like we are spying in on every conversation and everything that's happening from another booth or from the back of the bus or something like that. And it's a really subtle thing. And then you also have the little handheld shaky cam thing going on. It's a really subtle thing, but it's a great way to subconsciously put the audience in a subjective point of view in the film. Like we are in there watching, observing from a distance these very secretive and mysterious things that are happening.
Yeah, and there is, like you said, there's something quintessentially spy or espionage-esque about a telephoto lens. I mean, you see them in spy movies all the time too, with people actually spying on each other with a telephoto lens. And I think we might have talked about this before at some point on the podcast. I can't remember specifically where. But these things that become part of the cinematic rhetoric over the course of years and years and years, and things that just become associated with a certain genre, like, you know, talking about film noir, when we talk about like fedoras just put you in a film noir mood just because it's been associated with it for so dang long. And talking about an espionage action thriller, spy thriller, mystery like Jason Bourne, telephoto lens, same thing. People spying on each other, or even, I think it's at the end of this film, specifically at the end of Supremacy, when Bourne is spying on Pamela Landy with his monocular, which looks like he just broke a binocular in half. I don't know if that's actually a thing, but it looked really cool on screen, so that's awesome.
And the other interesting thing, just in relation to all of that with this film, is that we have set up who Jason Bourne is. We know that he's a spy. He worked for these people. We don't have to go through this whole identity journey that we did in the Bourne Identity. So there's really, now that he knows he's a spy and he realizes what all of these skills that he has gained come from, in this film, we actually get to see a lot of those cool spy techniques that kind of set our imaginations off as kids. It's like, oh, what can we do with everyday things to be like spy things and all this stuff. So there's a scene where after killing one of the assassins with a shoelace or a extension cord or something, Jason Bourne kind of sets the gas off in the apartment, runs a toaster with a newspaper in it, and blows the whole thing up. And just again, taking that kind of MacGyver-esque thing to a whole nother level. We had the pen in one movie, and now we get a toaster bomb. And then another scene where he's trying to talk to Nikki and not be overheard by the CIA. He knows that they are listening and they have people everywhere. So he plans to meet her at the street where this huge parade or march of some kind is going on, and manages in the hustle and bustle to lose all the people that were following him and go underground so that they lose their connection. And all of these like really creative and, you know, things that are definitely spy things that you know, are like solid examples
of the crowd
of spying. Yeah. So we get into all of that part, and it plays off really well, and it's really fun to watch, especially as a kid when you're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. That was so smart. How did he do that? So we finally get into some of the nitty gritty of the action and the spying, and making spying like interesting to an audience sitting at home, because I imagine that 90% of the real world espionage is extremely boring.
Oh, yeah. No, like stakeouts, gathering information, I'm sure it is not exciting. Not exciting at all. It's not all like Jason Bourne. But yeah, no, that stuff is really, really key to making these films work, because you have to keep the audience interested and excited. You have to keep them entertained. I mean, we've talked about so much how you can impart meaning through film and how important that is, but that's not all film does. And that's not the only importance of film, because if that was the only importance of film, then it wouldn't still be around probably. One of the key functions of it is to entertain the audience. And, you know, when we're talking about films like Jason Bourne, they're remarkably well crafted. They talk a lot about meaning and identity, and this really interesting character study of a character who's trying to redefine himself, but at the same time, they're trying to make you, you know, have fun watching the movie. And that's part of the reason why I rewatched this at least 10 times, this entire series. And, you know, as a kid, like you were saying, like, it's really cool to watch this stuff. And I think I was actually a little scared of our toaster after I watched The Supremacy for a while. I kept making sure, it's like, oh no, I hope nobody left a piece of paper in the toaster tonight. I don't want to die. Which is completely absurd. But, you know, it's part of the cool thing of finding a film that you really love is when it just sticks with you like that, especially after the terror of toasters dissipates.
And what better way to keep people entertained than car chases? And the Bourne movies are super known for their car chases. We forgot to go into the one in the Bourne Identity, but there are great ones in all three of these movies that kind of just get amped up every time. In the Bourne Identity, they're driving through the streets of Paris was it?
Yes, Paris.
Going through tiny alleyways and down staircases and in a Mini Cooper. By the way.
And not a flashy car at all, and like the least flashy car available, and they're still doing these chases, which is great. It's kind of like the Pin all over again. It's he's trying to outrun him in a car, and what kind
Using
of car?
what you have.
A Mini Cooper. Oh
yeah.
Oh, he's screwed.
Yeah, so putting him as the underdog, but using the resources available to get away anyway. And then in the Bourne Supremacy, we have a car chase where Jason Bourne is in a commandeered taxi cab, and the other guy is in a commandeered just like big old SUV, which makes it, again, Jason Bourne as the underdog, but going through tunnels and all this stuff, and then he kind of the chase should have killed him, honestly, but kind of maims him and sets up for the next film. But the way that these car chases are done, of just like the amount of coverage that is shot on these, and the amount of stunts. And I think that one of the things that these movies are also known for is doing real stunts, whether it be the fighting or car chases and stuff like that. In a time where the CGI was becoming more popular and doing, faking things to make it easier to produce movies, these movies actually did their work to set up the choreography, set up their car chases, and really make it work. And they do, and they're really epic and brutal when it comes down to it.
Yeah, it really does show, because you would feel when... there's just that part of CGI when it's on screen where you can feel that part of it isn't real, or less real. And when it is real, like these Jason Bourne films, like you feel that, and it's all that more exciting and impressive to watch. And just to hop back a movie for a second, one of the things I like contrasting the Bourne Identity chase and the Bourne Supremacy chase is that in the Bourne Identity, it's about Bourne getting away. He doesn't want to fight anybody. He is trying to escape, and Marie has just committed to sticking through this craziness with Jason Bourne, and so she's experiencing. So there's emotions going through the car chase where Marie is experiencing oh my gosh, what am I getting myself into? Oh, but wait, Jason is really skilled. Maybe we might be okay. Oh no, wait, this is really crazy. And Jason Bourne is learning on the fly, oh, hey, I know how to drive a car really well. Because remember, he's remembering things throughout the course of that film. But then flip to the Bourne Supremacy, he came to Russia to kill this assassin. And now this assassin is chasing him in a car. And it looks like the assassin is chasing Jason, but kind of the whole time, Jason's goal is still to end the assassin. So it's kind of this car chase in Supremacy is really a cat and mouse game where the cat and the mouse are actually the mouse and the cat. But it makes for a really interesting dynamic over the course of the car chase, because yes, it's a step up from the Bourne Identity, but it's also a completely different dynamic throughout the car chase. And the motivations going into it that goes beyond just the flash and the boom and the crash excitement of watching this set piece car chase happen on screen.
Yeah. And just a little sidebar. Another thing that's interesting in this movie is there is somewhat less of the tenderness to Bourne in this film. After Marie is killed, he doesn't have that other side to play off of. In the Bourne Identity, there's a great scene when they're at Marie's brother's house with his kids, and Bourne is kind of in their room at night in it's not as creepy as it sounds, I promise. But he's looking at them like, I've brought danger on these innocent children. I don't want to know who I am. I don't want to know what I've done. I want to be a new person. And that's a really great moment of heart in this otherwise very high adrenaline film. And Supremacy doesn't have as much of that. You get a little bit when Marie dies. But other than that, there's not so much. Even his interaction with Nikki is very violent and angry because he doesn't know what's going on. And in Ultimatum, we get a little bit more of that with Nikki. But in here, that's another thing, is that it's just kind of rough all the way through, with not as much nuance in the in Bourne's interaction with other people.
All right, so let's talk about the last movie today, the last in the trilogy that we will ever mention, the Bourne Ultimatum from 2007, the final installment of the Jason Bourne saga as far as I am concerned. So this film picks up minutes after the car chase in the Bourne Supremacy, where Jason Bourne finds a safe spot, finds what seems to be like a pharmacy or medical lab or of some sort, cleans his wounds, and he starts having flashbacks of the man who trained him in the CIA for Operation Treadstone. And that is kind of the driving force of this movie, is he's going to find the last break in his identity. There's kind of that break in the identity that happens in the Bourne Identity, where he's shot in the Mediterranean and he wakes up and he has no memory of his past. But also, if you consider him joining the Treadstone project and kind of being brainwashed and morphed into this perfect cold-blooded killing machine, that's kind of the other break of in identity. So he's going back to try to find that other point in his life, because he's haunted by it. He needs to know, and he doesn't. I think there's another part of him that doesn't want it to happen to anybody else, so he needs it to end. And that's kind of the driving force of this film. Eventually he travels to the United States, where much of this film takes place, and kind of finds his way to, I don't want to say home, but the evil guy in the film kind of calls it coming home, where Jason Bourne finds where he was created into Jason Bourne from his original life as David Webb, which was his first name.
Yeah, after going all over the world, following various trails and stuff like that. And that's one of the things we should talk about, is like how much location jumping there is in these movies. Like, we've already mentioned India and the United States and Berlin, but I mean, they go everywhere in these movies. And sometimes just because of how fast paced they are, like if you're not paying attention completely, or if you're 12 years old, it can be really hard to follow exactly where we are and how we got here and what's going on. And even just like trying to remember them. We just watched these this week and we're like, okay, where did this event happen and where were they at this point? But having such a broad variety of locations, A, is visually interesting, and B, just adds to this sense of this big international espionage thriller. And so it's a lot of fun, probably not logistically feasible, especially if you are traveling all over the world and people are searching for your passports and stuff like that. But regardless of all of that, it makes for some really interesting scenes in lots of different kinds of locations that add different flavors to each set piece scene.
Yeah. It definitely makes it very exciting. And we go to a lot of different locations in this film. Like I mentioned, he goes to America, he goes to New York, starts off in Russia at the end of the last movie. And of course, there's segments in Spain that happen as he tries to track down a leak in the CIA who might have information on the Treadstone Blackbriar project. He goes to Waterloo Station, which is in London, to try to track down the journalist who was talking to the leak, which is another very exciting scene where he kind of has to walk a civilian through a spy, an espionage, a military scenario and try to get him out safely. Spoiler alert, he does not get out safely. Jason Bourne does, not the journalist. And of course, they spend a lot of time in Morocco while they try to finally track down the runaway leak in the CIA who has given away all this information. And Jason Bourne has his epic fights with the CIA asset Desh, which includes the towel fight and the book fight, which are both I think they're the same fight actually, but they're very
Yeah, they
exciting
are.
to watch. Again, like we spoke about with the underdog, we know by this point it's been well established that Jason Bourne is a near unbeatable badass, but he is always kind of one step behind the bad guy. He is, or I don't even know if bad guy's the right term. I mean, the guy is technically
Assassin,
just doing
yeah.
his job. He's a brainwashed person doing his job. But the antagonist, he's one step behind the antagonist. He is the underdog rushing to catch up. He is somebody he wants to protect in this situation because at this point he's traveling with Nikki again. And he is stuck trying to use a book and a towel to beat a guy with like a knife and a gun.
Right. Who's already one-upped him in one instance where he gets to the source, the journalist's source before he does, and kills him. So, he's already like in many ways disadvantaged. So the other interesting thing about that fight is that it starts off as a foot chase across rooftops and through apartments and buildings and stuff in Morocco. But the fact that it is Morocco and it's a primarily Muslim country adds this element where in the middle of the fight, the prayer call goes out. And so the streets that at the beginning of this chase were just filled with people and markets and noise and hustle and bustle become dead quiet, and people have gone inside, and it creates this lull in the chase scene, and just kind of based on the environment, again adding a different flavor based on where you are. Just having that element that is inherent to the location adds an element that doesn't normally happen in a chase scene or has to be created artificially somehow in order to just create this interesting beat, a new beat from lots of fast-paced running and stuff to just, okay, now we're trying to figure out where everyone is. It's very quiet, and it creates more interest and an energetic differentiation.
Yeah, and we should mention the pacing of these films is just brilliant, and it's part of what makes the action sequences work so well, interspersed with all of the drama and the character study and the self-searching that Jason Bourne has to do. And you mentioned this a little bit before when we were talking about the fight in the Paris apartment in the Bourne Identity, is that right before the big fight scene, we have this long, slow scene where Jason Bourne is entering this apartment that was supposedly his, but he knows nothing about it, and he's looking for clues, and he thought he would find an answer, but of course, in place of an answer, he finds more mysteries. So, both scenes feel better paced in comparison to the other. One feels very slow. You can sit in it, the mystery, you can sit in the emotion of it, and the other feels very fast paced compared to the slowness of the other one. And they do that throughout the entire course of this trilogy to make to really get that heart pounding action. When you really feel your heart pounding during a movie, it's probably because it's gone from 0 to 60 rather than just being at 60 the entire time. Like, you can adapt to the speed of a film for sure. Like, if it's just action all the way through, you can adapt to it, and you would just be like, okay, this is just more action. But in the Jason Bourne trilogy, they let you simmer down, and then they bring it back. And then they let you simmer down, and then they bring it back. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, and in this film, we get, at some point, Nikki gets wrapped up with Jason Bourne once again, but they kind of go, they're kind of running around together for a little bit once she realizes that he probably isn't the bad guy. Maybe her employees are the bad guy. So we're back to a more nuanced tone like we had in the Bourne Identity. And one of the things I noticed on this watch through was how many parallels there are to the Bourne Identity and how much Paul Greengrass calls back things that happened in Lyman's film, such as a scene where Jason Bourne is sitting in a diner with Nikki, and you've got orange light on one side and blue light on the other side, and it's almost a parallel scene in Identity with Marie, except in one scene, Jason Bourne is giving information to Marie, telling her what he knows and what he's trying to figure out about himself. Whereas in the Bourne Ultimatum, you have Nikki, who knows what Jason Bourne is and how he got that way, imparting information to Jason Bourne, who still is trying to put the pieces together. And there's another scene between two of the CIA operatives in the Bourne Identity where the higher up is like, okay, how'd you let this happen? You screwed up this job, killing this African leader. How did you do that? And they're in this cafe area that's completely empty, black tables, and on all the tables there are these red flowers. And then in the Bourne Ultimatum, you have another scene between two CIA operatives, Pamela Landy and Noah Vosen, who is working for Blackbriar, the new Treadstone. And they're in a cafe situation with black tables and red flowers on all the tables. And it's completely full, though. So there's a lot of people around them. And it kind of accents this idea that in the first movie, Treadstone is still kind of undercover and nobody knows about it. So they're completely alone in this conversation. Whereas in Ultimatum, the whole first half of Ultimatum is about a journalist getting a hold of this information and leaking it out into the world. So now these goings on are not as private and they're kind of out in the world. And so adding people into a similar kind of scene helps to accentuate that kind of subconsciously. And the last thing that I noticed was at it's not quite the end, but I always think of it as the end for some reason. The last agent that Bourne kills in Identity before he dies, he is talking about, how taxing it is to be in the Treadstone program. And he's like, look at us, look at what they make you give. And at the end of the Bourne Ultimatum, Bourne says the exact same thing to another younger, presumably operative, who was wondering why Bourne didn't kill him earlier in the film. And Bourne says, look what they make you give. And so it's just this perfect way to wrap up the film, wrap up the trilogy. And I think that's what makes it a really good end cap to the series, which doesn't often happen for trilogies, especially for action, quote unquote, popcorn movie trilogies.
Yeah. And it's a shame that it's not the end.
Right. It was the perfect cap.
Yeah, it's such a great ambiguous ending that is complicated in all the ways that Jason Bourne himself is complicated, in all the ways we've come to understand that Jason Bourne is complicated. And real quick, before we slide into overall notes, Jonathan, I have an interesting question for you.
Okay.
Do you think the new movies, The Bourne Legacy and Jason Bourne, I want to say that's what the latest one is called, just Jason Bourne. It
is, yeah.
Do you think those existing ruin the old films?
No, not at all. I could totally get the same enjoyment out of the first three on their own and somewhat less and different kind of enjoyment out of Legacy. I have not seen Jason Bourne yet, but it kind of makes me sad that I can't just like have them on their own and there's always this extra little piece hanging on, but I can still just watch those three and be totally satisfied.
Okay. Do you plan on seeing Jason Bourne at any point?
At some point, if the opportunity comes up, I'm not gonna like shun it.
Because I am going to shun it. I am actively not watching either the Bourne Legacy or Jason Bourne because I am happy with how the trilogy exists. And I think instead of being one of those whiny fans on social media who gets very upset that that something they love is continuing and potentially being ruined by new installments, I am making the choice to take it into my own hands and just not participate in the new section of the franchise. I have my section of the franchise, and I am good. And I think I feel the same way about other series that have gone on maybe too long as well. Like, if I could go back and not watch the prequels to Star Wars, I would do so. And just watch the originals and the new ones, because the new ones might have potential for me. But I don't know. I just wanted to get your take on that, because that is interesting. Because we both love this trilogy so much. And, studios being what studios are, you can never count on a franchise truly being dead. So how do you maintain your enjoyment of the sections of the franchise you like when you don't have any control over how much of a franchise exists and in what qualities?
Yeah, but I think there is a balance, and you kind of brought it up yourself, even though you glossed over it. The fact that you are planning to watch the new Star Wars films, whereas the original trilogy of Star Wars is perfectly sufficient on its own. There is an element of giving the new stuff a chance. Sure, it doesn't need to exist, but if it's going to, and people are putting effort in it to make it good, then maybe you don't go see it in theaters. Maybe you don't contribute to the box office hype that says, oh, it's profitable to keep these series going, but just completely ignoring it as a piece, maybe not like the best blanket policy.
Yeah. We might have to pick and choose. We'll see. Because we don't know. And a lot of the things that we love today we consider perfect as is, they don't need anything else. We don't need any remakes of it. They're going to get remade and rebooted and remade, because that's just how Hollywood does.
And not always terribly, but
yeah.
So there's a give and take.
Yeah. And let us know what you think on Twitter. Reach out to us. Our Twitter handles are at the end of this podcast, and we would love to hear what you have to think about the situation. And now on to overall notes for Jason Bourne.
Yeah. So the first thing that we kind of want to bring up, which you would kind of come up with this point, is that these movies are, as opposed to the Bond movies, which have been going on since time began, these are a quote unquote realistic spy franchise. You can kind of nitpick like how much property damage there is, and how he traveled all these places when the CIA is after him and all this kind of stuff. But when it comes down to it, like compared to most of the other really big action franchises, we think like Mission Impossible and all these things that have so much kind of flair and almost like fantasy. They're in a way they're almost fantasy movies.
Oh, definitely fantasy.
How much like gadgets Bond has, and
James Bond is definitely fantasy fulfillment for a lot of people.
And like we've been talking about, Bourne uses a lot of kind of ordinary, everyday kind of weapons, just whatever is around him in his environment, as opposed to having Q work up the perfect gadget that's going to magically solve the situation that he's going to end up in the third act. And also the way that his relationships with the two main female characters in the films, Marie, they don't just like, immediately dive into a romantic relationship. There is a process of discovering each other. And then after Marie has died and he's invested so much of his life into her, and then he starts interacting with Nikki in the Bourne Ultimatum, he's very wary, and they don't get into a romantic relationship at all, even though there's another one of those kind of mirror scenes with Identity where Nikki changes her hair and washes it. And in Identity, Marie had done the same thing. She washed her hair and changed her looks in this hotel room, and that was their bonding moment with Bourne and Marie. Whereas when Nikki, the scene where Nikki is doing that in the hotel room, Bourne kind of looks in at her, but then he's like, okay, it's time to go. And then that is their departure moment. And so, it's not the oh my gosh, spies are so dreamy, let's go back to my place immediately. There's very just like much more down to earth than any other action franchise.
Oh yeah. They're these very complex, emotionally involved, emotionally conflicted relationships. And again, I hesitate to say they're real because some of the situations are incredibly extreme, as our theme song likes to suggest. So I don't want to say they're real, but they are realistic, like approximating real. And that's what's really cool about this franchise, is you feel like, as crazy as some of the stuff in it may seem, it feels like it could happen. Because he's using a monocular, he's using a prepaid cell phone that he picked up in Waterloo Station. He's not whipping crazy gadgets out of anywhere, like you said. And I think that's what, I don't know, kind of sets it apart from the spy action thrillers of the previous generation, and basically the previous century, because this is right at that time. Looking at something like Mission Impossible or James Bond, like you said, which are just completely out there, especially Mission Impossible with like their Scooby-Doo masks. There's
Right.
there's nothing cartoonish in a Jason Bourne film. It is all very gritty, very real, very complex, very down to earth, even like you said, even though it is so out there, which I think is part of its appeal to its fans. Is like, this is action, but this is action we can get emotionally attached to. Because I think there's part of like a James Bond film where you go to watch it and you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to turn my brain off now and just watch it. But in these Jason Bourne films, in this trilogy, you get to really enjoy the complexity of it and the emotions that are happening on screen that are mirrored by and extensions of and happen alongside of all of this crazy action.
Yeah, and you mentioned the technology and the gadgets, and they're not like crazy out there, but it is interesting to watch the technology changes in these films, because we're starting in 2002 and a lot of technological innovations happened within those 5 years alone. But we start off in Identity, and there's these huge like CRT monitors on the computers and the CIA office, which was actually a very specific choice to make the CIA offices look like this kind of rundown, grimy offices where everyone's desk is just kind of thrown in one room. Lighting isn't all white and perfect, and because, you know, in a lot of other movies, you know, these high government operations have like the most pristine and glass and white and perfect, almost like stock photo looking offices. And Doug Liman wanted it to feel more realistic, like kind of going into the back offices of some just random store or something like that. And it's very just cables are everywhere, and they're just like throwing stuff up on a board and writing on it with marker and all that kind of stuff. And then as we go through, Ultimatum almost starts to get to that kind of pristine and glass and fancy looking situation. It works for the film and the environment that they're in, but it's interesting to see that change in dynamic with the technology, where Bourne's using a payphone in the Bourne Identity, and then he's using prepaid phones and cell phones in the Bourne Ultimatum to talk to the Guardian journalist and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to see, because this isn't an uncommon thing in franchises, especially ones that go on for a very long time. But to see two different directors tell the same story over the course of 3 films, and transitioning between the two, you know, because you look at something like the Harry Potter franchise, which had like 3 or 4 different directors. You know, it's not out of the blue. It's not something that is super uncommon, but it is something that is hard to do and to pull off a cohesive look. And if you really get down into it, you can see the difference between Identity and the following 2. Like, you can kind of feel it. But it isn't drastic. It's all in the same world. It's definitely all Jason Bourne all the way through. It feels the same. Greengrass's camera work might be a little more active, so to speak,
Right.
A little more kinetic, but it isn't way off the charts, and it kind of mirrors the escalating intensity of the films over the course of the trilogy.
Yeah, and you know, like we talked about with all the ways that Ultimatum plays off of Identity, and in a sense, I think Ultimatum is kind of the only one that is completely dependent on the other 2. Like, I don't think you can get the complete enjoyment of Bourne Ultimatum on its own, but having the context of the other 2 makes Bourne Ultimatum that much stronger, because Greengrass does a great job of pulling in the influence of the first 2 films, especially the first one, not like being stingy and, oh, I'm just going to do my own thing and these movies are mine, and, you know, forget Identity. So it really all works together really cohesively, despite having 2 different captains at the helm, if you will. So a last thing that's just kind of an interesting observation is that if you look on IMDb at the original posters, there have been plenty of posters made afterwards, especially now that the franchise has been kind of rebooted. But But in the original posters for the Bourne Identity, the color scheme is literally split down the middle between blue and orange. And orange and teal, orange and cyan is kind of this kind of trope in action movies, because in the color spectrum, orange is a complement to blue. And so skin tones are very orange and shadows are easy to tint blue. And it's a very easy way to make a dramatic look. And it's been used in like all kinds of things. Transformers famously uses it all the time. But if you look at the other two posters, the Bourne Supremacy has a very green tint to it, and the Bourne Ultimatum is almost a monochrome blue. And it's interesting that color scheme kind of seeps its way into the films too. There is a very like a contrast between blue scenes and orange or brown scenes in the Bourne Identity. The Bourne Supremacy has like a very green tint to it, almost matrixy in some parts. And then the Ultimatum, it has a very cool cast to it, and especially in the memories of his training and stuff, it's all very blue and washed out. And I don't know, like if that was a editing color choice in post-production, or that influenced the poster and marketing and stuff, or if that was a marketing choice that like, oh, hey, this would be a good way to incorporate into the movies too. But it is kind of an interesting subconscious way to differentiate the films in your brain, just from a aesthetic point of view. They all still maintain a consistent aesthetic and look and feel, but they all have a slightly different tint to them, just in a purely color sense. And it's something that's interesting that you don't really think about, but I've just noticed it in the posters, and it kind of flows into the way that the films are made too. And I can't think of another series except for films that use that as a very specific point, like oh shoot, I don't know how to say it, but Kliskowski, I don't know. So a Polish director made a series of films called Blue, White, Red, and literally every film revolves kind of around those colors, because it's kind of based around the French flag. But it's just an interesting kind of thing that they threw in there that subconsciously helps you differentiate the films in your mind.
Yeah. I mean, all things really should be based off of the French national flag, as we all know. But yeah, no, you're totally right. It is an interesting. Oh my gosh! If you start singing this, I'll be miserable. Oh, jokes. We got them. Yeah, no, we could go back and forth on what those specific colors mean all day, and neither of us would be right or wrong. Or actually, I'll take that back. We could come up with plenty of wrong answers and a few that sound really good and might be right. But I think you're right. I think it's just a really good way to help give each installment of the story its own feel and its own certain distinct look, slightly apart but still in the same family as the other two films, which makes it really interesting. And like we said, even though this is a film that switches between directors, it has its same DP, has its same crew. It feels very much like the same trilogy all the way through. I mean, I can and have several times sat down and watched all three straight through. And it feels very much like the same universe the entire time for a certain consistent Jason Bourne look and feel. Yeah.
And I guess kind of before we leave these movies, we should kind of retroactively talk about our personal take on these movies. We've been talking about it throughout the whole podcast, but like we grew up with these films and really enjoying these films. So we weren't going into them today like looking to pick them apart and just, destroy them and erase all of the enjoyability from them. Because we really like these movies. And so we kind of came at them this week with this view of what about these movies draws us in so much, draws in people who are 12 years old and like just want to see a cool spy movie, to even adults who, aren't looking for the deepest film to watch, but are not looking for movies like, we bash the Transformers a lot on this podcast. But
Everyone bashes the Transformers a lot.
That are literally just based on toys to make money and keep little kids coming back to watch them. Like, these are solid movies that have enough depth to them and are put together really well. And it was really cool to just go through and even going into them like with a little bit of a microscope and just kind of scrutinizing them, they still hold up pretty well. And the fact that they're Ultimatum is 10 years old this year, so they have still held their ground pretty well amongst
we're old.
action movies. Yeah, I know.
Oh gosh, I didn't need to hear that today, Jonathan. Okay. But yeah, no, you're totally right. These are wonderful action movies, but there's something more to them. Like, the reason that I watched them over and over and over as a kid wasn't just because they were exciting and the action was exciting. It's because they were interesting. There was something deeper there. And part of it is that the mystery is just really complex and hard to follow as a young kid. And part of it is that the character of Jason Bourne, and you can really look at these entire films as a character study of Jason Bourne, is just such a fascinating, complicated character at a really conflicted time in a life to ever have, to anybody. To have your mind wiped, to have been a top brainwashed CIA operative, to be trying to define your new life at the same time as you're trying to escape your old one and reckon with it. Like, it's all so fascinating and complex that it sticks with you and it makes you want to come back to it and experience it again and again and again.
And I am sure we will, but that is it for them on the podcast. So next week, we are, however, transitioning into movies that are pretty new. And, or for us at least, they're actually quite old. And we're going back once again to World Tour directors. And we're going to dig into Fritz Lang and talk about 3 of his films. One of them, a silent film, Destiny, from 1921, which is available on Netflix for anyone looking for it. Followed by M, from 1931, one of Peter Lorre's great films in his native language. And finally, The Testament of Dr. Mabuse from 1933. So we're going to get a little, getting back into our German Expressionism, get a little darker as we come up to Halloween.
Right, and we do love talking about silent films. So we'll get a bit of that. We'll get a bit of that nice, creepy German expressionist horror going on. It should be a lot of fun leading up to our holiday of Halloween here at the end of October here on the Filmlings. We do like to get into the spirit of the holidays, so we will be doing our best of that next week. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
To find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about. Seriously, do that.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya.
Extreme ways are back again. Da, 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 da.